Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I am Carr McDonald. I am the Director of Education here for UXPA, and I'm going to be your moderator for this discussion today. We're super excited to be joined by this awesome panel of content writers and strategists who are in the UX field. And before we jump in, there's just a few things to note. Everybody is in mute. You're in mute mode for your audio. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat window in the webinar control panel to ask any questions that you may have. Also, this is being recorded, so the recording will be available at the conclusion of the talk. And lastly, feel free to register for our UXPA International Conference and also our upcoming short courses and webinars. So, without further ado, I know we want to kind of get in and get to talking to our panelists and kind of asking exactly what they do and who they do it for. So let's start off with Alyssa.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Lerner. Thanks, Carm. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm a senior UX writer at Google.
Okay. Next, Bria.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bria Hunter. I'm a content strategist at Facebook, and I work on the Messenger app.
Carrie?
All right, I'm Carrie Hain, and I'm the founder and principal strategist at Tanzan, which is a content strategy consulting and training company.
And I'm Kimberly Reyes, and I'm a senior content strategist at Walmart Labs for the online grocery department.
Okay, great. Again, thank you guys for joining us. So let's jump on in. I know that most of the audience here is interested to know that how you guys were able to get into the UX field with a content or writing background. So whoever wants to start us off, please feel free to jump in.
I'll go ahead. Well, I'll just start speaking at once. Well, I accidentally happened into it. I have been doing this for about 20 years, so I was lucky enough to get started right when the web started taking off, right before the first .com boom, which some people don't even remember anymore. But it was something. I was a director of communications, and I was in charge of putting up our first website, and I thought this was pretty cool. I didn't really know what I was going to do. And so I started off as a very generalist, like most of us did back in the day. And as the web matured and the digital space matured, I followed the path of staying with the strategy part and then content, information architecture and content, as that became a word that we started using. I was one of the people who read Christina Halverson's A List Apart article in 2008 and went, that's what I do. So I've kind of always done it, but unexpectedly, it's turning out to be something combining all the different things that I could imagine when I was a little girl, like being a historian and curating things, or being a literary agent and dealing with words. So and then a little bit when I was first introduced to computers, I thought they were cool. So I kind of do a little bit of everything, which is not something I would have imagined when I was in school, because I didn't even have email when I was in college.
Anyone else, please?
Actually, that's a good place for me to jump in. So in 2008, I was in college, and I think even though, there's like a time lag there, I think that there's a similar trajectory of thinking about words when you're growing up and studying them in school, and not knowing that content is the thing that you've been doing and working towards this whole time. So I studied a lot of different Englishy things. I was a theater student, and I was a journalism student, and I worked in journalism for a while. And that sort of pivoted into the world of, I always saw that as an outgrowth of communications and content and storytelling. And so when I got more interested in the world of technology, it became clear that there was just like this wide open field available for people who wanted to write about this stuff and not necessarily about it, but in it. That was sort of the pivot that I took to go from, more long form writing and journalism and reporting and into actual product writing and content strategy. And that was the path for me.
Great. So Bria or Kimberly?
I can go. I guess I sort of had a non-traditional path into content strategy, as most people do. When I was in high school, I wanted to do something creative, and I picked fashion design. It turned out I did not like that. And then I realized that I really liked writing, and I was thinking, like, how do you get a job writing? So I thought maybe I'd go into advertising. I majored in media studies at UC Berkeley. And my first job out of school was as a copywriter, but at a tech company. So what that ended up entailing was basically me just being their word. And so I wrote how-to articles for their tech products, blog posts, social media posts, and also a lot of UX writing. And my role from there just sort of grew more of a UX writing role. And that's basically how I found myself in this field.
Okay, great.
And I also started in the journalism world. I started in New York as well. In 2000, I graduated, and basically it kind of used to be that like there was the journalism, the editorial side of the building, and then the marketing side of the building for every company I worked at. And I was kind of buddy with a lot of the marketing people, and they were just pretty frank about with me and saying, like, if you want to make money and live in New York, why don't you try to do what we do? We make 3 times of what editorial people make. And we're pretty sure you can do this job. So why don't you take a stab at copywriting? And I really liked it, especially since I also have a literary background in poetry. And copywriting is about utilizing as few words as possible, basically, in the space that you have, which is not unlike poetry. And so yeah, for me, it was like journalism, copywriting, and then I moved out here, and it seemed like all of the copywriting titles were like content design and content strategy titles. So that's the transition that I took.
That's pretty interesting, and I'm glad that you brought up how content strategy kind of looks like at your job, like how it looks like where you are presently. So if you guys can kind of tell us, like, what is content strategy and content design? Like, what does that involve? Like, who's involved in it? What does it entail? What does it look like at your present organization?
So I work on Google Cloud Platform, and I work on a really interesting embedded team of UXers, designers, researchers, writers, and engineers. And every product that my team staffs is this integrated unit of engineering and UX. And so what that means is that we have a lot of engineers who are really sensitive to user journeys, to the effect of good design and good copy in a good product. And you have a lot of UXers who are then a lot closer to the actual product development lifecycle and the contingencies and dependencies of both front end and back end engineering. And so we end up with like this really interesting, I guess, integration of a lot of different disciplines. And it makes for a really, this job has been different than, more content strategy focused work, and now really in this development UX work of measuring and studying the effect of words or the effect of design on the actual user engagement and user experience. So that's a little bit about this corner of the world.
Okay, great. So then, tell me, why would you guys say your work is important? And I know that you were saying that you guys tested. How is it possible to measure success? But we'll do one question first. Tell me why the work is important.
Well, content's the reason people do everything. we're not artists, and even art is content, really. So yeah, it's the reason people come to you. And now, as we're seeing this shift to voice, obviously that's not everywhere, but it's becoming everywhere. I bought my first Google Mini, so now I have a speaker to talk to, um, after resisting for a really long time. But so content's all that's left. But what I've been talking about is people from the dawn of humankind have needed information. What changes is how they get it. And we're as content strategists and working in technology, and I don't even work really with technology companies. My clients are not generally tech firms, but we're at the forefront of that. We understand the intersection of storytelling and helping people get information and an experience that is for the person who's using the things that we make.
Mhm. Anyone else have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Right now, I am writing for grocery. And so for me, I think the most important part of my job is accessibility, and who can best utilize this tool, who may have seen barriers to using this in the past because maybe they don't think they understand technology, but maybe those are precisely the people who need it the most. And so I see content as incredibly important as breaking those barriers and making it feel and seem accessible to everybody.
Great. So then how are you able to kind of measure the success of the content? Like, how is that possible?
Oh, I can speak to that as well. I think it's a matter of, I think our job as content strategists in particular is to sort of like break through the business speak. If you find yourself in a meeting where you're like, I don't even understand what you're talking about, so how am I going to filter this to the audience? I feel like my measure of success is knowing that it is like the most sort of seamless, plain spoken experience possible. Like, do I feel like my dad, who like can barely get through AOL, would be able to like get through the shopping experience? And then, I mean, there's lots of other metrics, obviously, and research can tell you if you've been successful in things. But just from stepping back from a common sense point of view, like, does this language make sense outside of these walls with all of our acronyms and our business speak? Like, is this something that I can present to like a 10-year-old, or an 80-year-old? So yeah, just common sense wise.
Okay. And I guess because it seems like maybe content strategy in UX is different from organization to organization. Can you guys tell me, like, at what part of the UX process is content kind of bought in? I know we probably have a lot of listeners here, and even myself, I'm curious to know, like, how is it that UX works closely with content? Like, how does that happen? If you guys can kind of share with us, like, your process for integrating those strategies with, your UX design teams.
I can speak to that at Facebook. So sort of similar to what Alyssa was saying, at Facebook, content strategists are like embedded within a product team. So we're a partner alongside product design, UX research, product management, and engineering. So when things are going well, I would say we are involved from like early design sprint stages. I know I've worked at places in the past where a lot of the like design and prototyping and like even scoping out engineering work is done, and then content is brought in to sort of fill in the blanks. So that's something I've really appreciated here, is feeling like a true partner from the beginning of like conceptualizing a flow or an idea.
Yeah, big plus one to what Bria said. I think that there's been a shift in the last, couple years to understanding that content isn't the thing that happens after design, and it's not the thing that comes in, you have a pretty picture and then you say, okay, someone's now going to fill in the blanks and slap some words on it. In a similar way that, like, I think that in engineering, it's also pivoted, but earlier, it's been around longer. Like, you don't just build a thing and then say, okay, design's going to come in and make it look pretty. I think that, like, as an industry, we're moving towards this much more holistic understanding of how these things need to be built together from beginning to end, or at least be more informed about each aspect of this process. And one way that like I see that happening is, when you have writers and designers and researchers and engineers all working in tandem, you have this ability to say like, okay, well, we know based on metrics and click-through rates or usage rates of like this button or this user journey, like we're getting hangups like right here. Why is there no completion, or where's the confusion? And then you can say, oh, well, this information is too tucked away. We need to bring it to the forefront. And then when you have a writer who understands that, and a designer who is in good communication with that writer, and an engineer who has a tool to bring it to the front, you end up with a much faster way to improve the user experience and much more like ideas and like opportunities to like experiment with ways to get that information, that instructional stuff in front of the user so that they can understand how to use the product or complete whatever journey they're on.
That's great. That's pretty interesting. And I know that just listening to you, Bria, and Alyssa, it seems like you guys are embedded in the team. How much influence do you guys think organizational structure has on a content strategy? So it seems like you guys, you're embedded in the team, so you're brought in from start to finish. You're not like an afterthought. It's not designed and then somebody kind of brings content in. So just knowing that, how much do we think that organizational structure, how much influence does that have on content strategy?
Everything. It has everything to do with it.
Okay.
There's, so I'm not on a product team. I am a content strategist as a consultant, and most of my clients are small and mid-sized business. So there is no UX team. I am the UX team until we bring in designers, and those are primarily UI designers who know user experience, but their skill is in the visual design, and then developers, front end and back end developers. So, but the organization structure dictates whether you have content strategy in the first place, how it fits in. There's a lot of places that I've seen where it still is an afterthought, even if they have a content strategist. It's something that people don't fundamentally understand in a lot of places yet. So yeah, if there's not complete buy-in from the top and an understanding how content strategy and content generally fit in to your business, then it's never going to get the talent and the input and the collaboration that it needs to have with the rest of the business.
Wow. So I know, Carrie, you said you work with different types of businesses and organizations. Like, is there a recommended approach for any type of business or organization that's looking to kind of transform their content strategy?
There's no one size fits all, as I'm sure we all know. But actually, I just completed at the end of last year a study about content strategy in associations, and that will be published sometime in the next month or two. But what we found there is that there's kind of stages in development, and everybody has to start from the beginning. Their path through to being mature, a mature content strategy organization, is different, but everybody has to start somewhere. And it might take, one company might take a year for that maturity to happen, and others might take 10 years. And again, that's based on organizational structure and how well they use content strategy to help them meet their goals. The faster I think you can show success, the faster it will take off within an organization.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was kind of what I alluded to earlier, like how do you actually measure that success? So I think you bring up a great point. Anytime you have where you want rather to get buy-in, how is it possible to kind of show that success early on to possibly get your higher level or executive level leaders to kind of buy into this content strategy? And I don't know if you guys, had any experience with like maybe building a content strategy from the ground up or even influencing that in your organizations, but please feel free to kind of jump in because I'm curious to know for myself, like how can you show that measure of success to get that buy-in?
Well, I think that goes to the question of what the goal is to begin with. And I think that, I mean, to Carrie's point, there's no one size fits all. So like if you're a startup and, you're talking about content strategy, I mean, it's a really, we're both lucky and unlucky to have such a broad bucket that describes the work we do. So like, are we talking about awareness? Are we talking about brand understanding? Are we talking about user engagement? Are we talking about in purchasing? Like, I don't know. It really depends on what the business is, what the product is, what the customer wants, and what your partner wants. And then you can start attacking, like, you can slice away, okay, given like this goal, this is what success would look like for that. So like the approach that I would take on my current team versus like when I was consulting for independent clients, like have completely different goals in mind. So like the way that I would measure success on my work today is very different. It would even vary from product or project to project depending on who wants what. And I think that the earlier content strategy brought in, the more we can help our partners but the earlier that we get brought in, the more we can help our partners in the first place, and then help them set appropriate. I'm going to mute myself for a minute.
You know what's going on with this one?
Yeah, sorry, it sounds like we're getting feedback. Maybe we can mute our phones until it's our turn. Okay, let's try this again. All right. This is a great thing about technology, right? We're still getting feedback. Okay, 1 second. Let's see here. Okay, it looks like everybody. Kim, is it possible to go on mute for a second?
Sure.
Okay, is this better? Okay, so let's do this. We'll mute ourselves while everybody else is talking. That way we can get through this as painless as possible. So this is really interesting. I know personally, we're thinking about our content strategy. I think content in our organization is kind of consultancy based and not necessarily embedded. So it's great to hear you guys' feedback about how embedding content within products teams, how that may work differently. I do have a question. I'm interested to know, like, has there ever been this gap that existed between like content strategy and UX design? I hear it from different people, and again, organizational structure may play a huge role into that, but just in you guys' experience, is there this like content strategy and UX gap that exists? And if so, if you've witnessed it, how have you guys kind of tackled that?
I see it all the time. The way I solve it is I'm the UX designer and the content strategist. I've really never worked with a UX person as part of a regular team in all the teams that I've been on. I've worked with UI designers and who understand the user experience, and I've worked with backend developers, but I've had limited experience working directly with UX designers because I'm designing the content. I guess even again, I've always been designing the content, even before we had the term content design, which is really just putting your user needs first. And I've been doing a content first process for over 10 years now. So the content always came first, and then we would figure out how to make it useful. And we started with making it useful, and then we would use the design, the interface design to make it usable. And then of course the back end to support it, and make it all function the way we wanted to. But I think there shouldn't be a gap. I mean, in my view, user experience is an umbrella term. And so it includes research and design and development and content and accessibility and all kinds of other things. So, but we've gotten into a lot of silos, where people, even within teams, tend to work, do their thing, and then hand it off to someone else, hand it off to another team. So I'm really encouraged to hear the others here talk about being embedded and working really well with other people who have other strengths and expertise in different disciplines.
Excellent. Anyone wanted to add to that? And I think, Carrie, I think that you have a unique position where you're saying, I designed the content and the UX, and you're kind of thinking about these together as you are designing. But again, when you have product teams where there's an expert in both disciplines, where you have like that separation of content, the content discipline from the product design discipline, are there gaps that exist? Like, how is that interaction? I'm just kind of curious to know. And Bria, it looks like you may want to weigh in.
Something that I feel like makes a pretty big difference is at Facebook, content strategists basically report into the design organization. So we're a function of design along with like pure product design and UX research. So I go to design events, I I'm surrounded on all sides by designers or product designers. And I think that's been a big mindset shift from my last organization, where I was a part of a marketing organization, but sort of like had to go hand in hand with product design as a result of my job function and what I did.
And I can weigh in there as well, because I had a similar experience to Bria, where as a copywriter, you're more obviously on the marketing side of things. And as a content strategist, you are embedded with the design team. And it's almost impossible to sort of separate the content from the design part, as it should be. And so you kind of are expected to weigh in on information hierarchy and design, as well as just, putting the words in boxes.
Great. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We do have questions from the audience. There are people who are interested to know, like, how do you market yourself as like a UX writer? Like, how do you explain to colleagues, clients, and others who may not necessarily know what that means or what that looks like?
It definitely takes some patience and perseverance. I think as a field, particularly like UX writing, I think content strategy, people are more comfortable with the term. It sounds a little bit more familiar. People know what content is. People know what strategy is. When you start saying UX writing to people, you get this little hazy look in their eyes. You don't know if they know what UX is anyway. It depends on who you're talking to. So I think particularly if you frame yourself as a UX writer, there are benefits to that because you really have you're able to speak to a very niche expertise, but you also have to spend more time explaining what that is. And so, okay, is that technical documentation? Are you a technical writer? Are you a product writer? Like, what does that mean? I mean, you get a lot of curiosity about it. So it's this really great opportunity to explain, like, actually, like, you have this whole user engagement path, and people need to read words on a page in order to understand what to do, just like they need to click a button on a page to understand what to do. And then you can, like, take a step backward from that too, and explain how that is related to the world of broader content strategy as well, because a good UX writer is also doing good content strategy, which fits into the broader narrative of whatever your company or product is trying to do. And there are these overlaps. We all have some little sprinklings of like marketing and communication in our portfolios as well. And so really great content strategy is able to like sync up with all of these different pieces at a company or whatever, to make sure that you're all telling the same story. You're just expressing it in different facets of the work. And so I think, when you can sort of take a step back and zoom out at each level of where the work is happening and explain to a person like how words and information and content fits into that bigger picture, like that's the approach that I like to take when I talk about UX writing.
Great. I know that there's some interest in knowing like what your day-to-day looks like. So if you guys can kind of give us, I guess, a visual of some sort of like, what's your day-to-day? Like, what are the tools that you guys are using?
I can jump back in, but happy to shut up for other people to talk about their tools as well. It varies a lot. I think for me personally, I like to work with the tools that my designers and engineers like to use. So that requires a little bit of flexibility about learning different kinds of strategies and tools to like get words across. So that's anything from working in mocks, design mocks like an InVision gallery or, some of Google's internal gallery tools, working in very extensive slides and spreadsheet presentations with a lot of commenting of back and forth, a lot of drafting and co-drafting and co-editing in various documents, spreadsheets of different text strings, and a lot of meetings. Good writing work is done when you're in good communication cadences with all of your partners at various levels of product development. And just sort of like a flexibility in both your time and tools to be able to pivot between all of them.
Okay.
Oh, and code. Also that occasionally.
Oh, okay, great. And it looks like Bria will probably join back in. Looks like we're still having some difficulties. But I know that we talk about the day-to-day tools and we kind of talk about the process. Like, what's like the average number of projects that you guys are working on at any given time? And what's like an optimal number for you? And Carrie is smiling. So please, feel free.
Too many.
Okay.
As a consultant, I don't, because my clients are smaller, the projects tend to be a little bit smaller. So I have usually my team and I will have 3, 4, 5, 6 projects at a time, at doing different things and at various stages of there. But even before, when I was at an agency, it was the same thing. And when I was the head of a web team at an organization, I think, and that's more my nature, I've always had control for the most part of how many things I'm doing at once, and I want to do everything. Slowly learning, I can't. But I think that's one of the dangers, and it's for anyone. It's not unique to content strategy, but I think where it fits with content strategy, I think it's our nature to want to fix things, and we can see things that need fixing all the time, and so we want to do it. So I think for me, it would be more optimal to have 2 or 3 projects, so that we can really focus and give our attention to them at a time. And if all of our partners and colleagues also only had those things to focus on too, it would be better. I don't see that ever happening. But the optimal versus reality, and But I think there's value just getting, into that. There's value in having time to sit and think and sketch, or write whatever it is that you need to do to solve the problems that we face every day. That we need to make sure to find that. And if for the people looking for a job, multitasking doesn't make you a better person. So that's code for you have to do too much when you're looking for a job. So you'll have to juggle priorities, but multitasking isn't going to make you a better strategist or UX writer.
And it's interesting that you were talking about, Carrie, looking for jobs, because I know a number of our audience members are interested to know, like, how do you go about transitioning into UX from content strategy? Like, what was that like for you guys? Did you face any challenges in particular? If you could kind of share that with us.
So for me, I think and what I often tell people who are asking a similar question, first of all, it's not like a binary, like either or, like you can and probably are doing both. But ironically, it's a narrative storytelling question. It's a question of framing. So if you're a writer and you're a content strategist and you want to be a UX writer, tell a different story about what you're writing. You're a writer and then you can do that. So for me, I think it was learning how to describe the work that I was doing in terms of user impact, as opposed to what I was more accustomed to doing before, which was about like broad narrative themes and like more large scale like story development. And even though that was what my portfolio looked like, I was just talking about it less in terms of like the writerliness of it and more about, okay, well, what was the point of this story? What was the information I was trying to deliver to my reader? Or what was like the goal of this particular like brand launch? And like, how did we measure it down the line? Like, how did I decide what a good editorial choice was? So it's a matter of framing the work that you do rather than doing entirely different work.
Great. Does anyone else want to contribute to that? Okay, and then for those who are interested, who may not necessarily have like a content writing background, do you guys have any advice for those people who are kind of looking to get into this particular field, but not necessarily have a writer or content writing background?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I would just say do the research, learn the language, don't be intimidated. Use journalistic tools and looking up people online who you kind of want to be like and organizations that you want to work for. See what's on their resume, see how they tell their story, see, sort of figure out in that way how you can make yourself a part of that world. But most importantly, don't be intimidated by the language. There are lots of online dictionaries where you can just sort of quickly Google and look up what something means. So do your research before you get into the interview, but do not be intimidated. There's lots of ways of saying the same thing in this world. So don't assume that you don't have the skills, just learn the language.
I would also just build on Kimberly's point. I would also not be intimidated by where you think you're coming from as opposed to where you think content strategy or UX writing is. I think that one of the benefits of coming into a growing field is that we all benefit from all of the background and expertise that new writers bring to it. So I think, knowing what your skills and strengths and experience are, and then looking at what exists in the field so far, figuring out how to present your assets as an addition to the work that is getting done is a totally valid approach. There's no one, as from all of our panelists, like there's no one right way to be a content strategist. And I think that we benefit from all of like the influx that new people bring into it. So yeah, like read and dive in.
So how long? Oh, go ahead, Bria. Glad you're back, Bria. Go ahead.
Yeah, my battery just gave out. I was gonna say that I've actually seen people transition into content strategy from both design and research, which was something that I wasn't expecting, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Like designers are able to just apply their design thinking that they've used in previous jobs to content and user flows and the words on the screen. And research, a lot of good content strategy is all about doing your research in advance. So I think that's a pretty good path in too.
Yeah,
I was
and
gonna say,
I've seen everything. Like, I obviously fell into the field and grew up with it, so I didn't have to make a case for it. But I've done a lot of hiring, and people. I think, and talking to other content strategists, just what Alyssa said. We come from all different places. I didn't even study writing. I was an international affairs and political science major. But for one thing, pretty much almost all backgrounds have some sort of writing or strategic problem solving in them. So I think at one point I heard content strategy is a good field for people with a liberal arts background who like spreadsheets. And I think that changes when you talk about product content strategy, because you're dealing with content differently than you are for an organization where it's a little bit maybe more on the marketing and communication side. But there's no one right way, and I actually am concerned that people are going to start going to school for content strategy, because that's going to get rid of all of these other things that people bring to it, and new perspectives and ways of looking at the user experience, the journey, how to communicate with people. And I think some of the smartest things I've heard are people with backgrounds in psychology and anthropology and sociology, because they know people, and all we're all communicating. We're helping communicate and facilitate people doing things. So yeah, just to echo everybody else, frame it, look at what you can bring to the field and frame it. Because I, as someone who hires people, am not afraid. I'm not afraid to hire someone who doesn't have a background in writing or design. There's so many different other ways to come to this.
so how will one go about, building a portfolio, or kind of showcasing that they have the skills to do content strategy for UX? Do you guys have any advice on that? Like, what do you guys, your portfolios? What do those include?
I think the best thing to do with any portfolio is first, like, pick work that you're proud of and that you can speak about at length without getting sick about it, because you're going to have to. It should be work that that stands up and that you feel is a good representation of your thinking and your work. And then second, as I don't know what kind of portfolio we're talking about, if that's just sort of like your website presence or your like standard boilerplate resume versus like a tailored one. I would say that the second process, in job seeking, or in terms of, working on your own presentation as like a content strategist or UX writer, is to think about tailoring those selections towards whatever job or project that you want to be working on. But first and foremost, I think, and this was advice that was given to me, and at least it's held up for me so far, is that like you just want to start with work that you're proud of, and then if you're able to speak to it about it intelligently, to Carrie's point, you don't have to have a particular background. You just have to prove that you know what you're about, and if you can convey that well, then you'll be able to do the skill, like you have the skills required to do the work. So whether that is like a really lengthy psychology paper, but you are really passionate about the subject and you really nailed it in that intro and you want to talk about it, I've seen that be a successful strategy. And I've also seen, microcopy be a successful strategy because, the applicant was super passionate about like this particular subhead. So, it really depends, and it just needs to be work that think stands up for itself.
Something that I find myself saying a lot is, with good content strategy, the thing that's going to make your work stand out to other content strategists should be your thought process. So like good content strategy isn't always just about like the output or like the actual words on the page being like the most poetic or like artistic or inspiring. It's about like people are really impressed by your thought process, how you landed on that decision, even if it's a more like simple solution, even if it's, not the most flowery, like people want to know like that you took the user's needs into account, that you like did your research, all of that.
Especially if it's a simple solution.
This is great. I want to know, are there any suggested readings or podcasts that we can recommend to our audience members?
There's no shortage of either of those things. I know Christina Halverson has a podcast now. She has different types of content strategists on there all the time. There's tons of UX podcasts. The UX podcast that's done by Per Axbaum and James Royal. He has another name. I'm blanking at the moment, but it's called UX Podcast, and they've been great. I did an episode for them last year, so we talk about content. But I think, I don't know if anybody else. So those are podcasts. They're reading. Again, there's the blogs. Gather Content has one of the best blogs out there, I think, that cover a really, really wide range of content topics. And they're what I refer to people a lot. And also A List Apart, Smashing Magazine is also starting to do more content and UX stuff as well. That speaks more broadly to a more holistic way of approaching digital products and communication. And can I make a plug for my book?
Go right ahead, Carrie.
Yeah. And I think that I focus on the back end of content strategy, so the structure of content and the organization of it, more than the front end of the messaging and editorial. So I wrote Designing Connected Content with Mike Atherton, and it was published last year. So go out, and if you're more interested in the technical side of content, that's where that fits in.
That's great. Thank you. I'll have to check that out. Thank you, Carrie. So it looks like our audience members are split between people who are trying to get into UX, as a content strategist or as a writer, or trying to pivot more so into this role. And then it looks like we have some people in the audience who are probably content writers and strategists in their organization, but maybe it's not focused on the UX side. Maybe they're trying to get buy-in from their company. So I am going to switch a little bit to like the day-to-day. Are there any like content guidelines that you guys use that you can probably recommend for any of our audience members? Like what is that day-to-day artifact or reference that you guys have for doing your job? Does that even exist? Kind of like a style guide of some sort.
So at my old job, we actually didn't have one. We were working on developing one. And we drew a lot of inspiration from Shopify has a content style guide called Polaris. I love reading their stuff on Medium about like just their entire product content strategy, like org. So I drew a lot of inspiration from that. I got the opportunity to sort of like help shape the style guide. Here at Facebook, there's already an established style guide, and it's really comprehensive. And it's definitely a blessing.
Great. Yeah, I think that's what, people are interested to know. Like, is there anything that kind of governs the content within different products? And what does that look like? Is there some type of artifact or like reference material for these products? So thanks, Bria, for sharing that. Another question that came up is as far as agile. So how does content and my assumption is that perhaps you guys work in agile teams. Is that true? Is my assumption off at all?
We try to. It's not perfect.
Okay. I tend to think that we're all practicing agile, but basically we do have some audience members that are curious as to how content strategy works in like an agile framework. So if anybody has some insight on that.
I don't work in that. I just don't need to, because of the nature of how I'm organized myself. But I go to a lot of UX conferences and I hear about this, and I never hear about the content. I think, and I've just seen even on Twitter this week, there's been a few conversations about design libraries that don't talk about content. So I think, in my view, from what I understand about the agile process, and like Alyssa said, it's whatever someone does at their organization, but it needs to be there from the start, and the person responsible for content, whatever their title is, needs to be part of the team from the beginning. And as far as I know, some of the content design work and the content strategy certainly needs to be part of Sprint Zero. There has to be a plan before you start, and you have to know why you're doing it, and what the content is, how the content fits into that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that makes sense, and you guys have kind of covered on that multiple times. So I think including content strategists from the start is going to be very important, and it's probably going to contribute, to the impact and the success of the product. I know we're getting closer to time, so there's a few more questions that I have for you guys. What are your predictions for 2019 as far as when we're talking about UX content and strategy? I know Carrie had said earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, you're like, at one point we're going to see people going to school specifically for this. So I guess, my question is to you guys, like, what's for the future? What's on the horizon?
I actually wrote that down, Carrie, because that's also a fear that I have, or it's something that I've talked about with friends who are also writers in various capacities, just like weighing the pros and cons of like, what would it mean to study this as a discipline, like the writing portion. I know that there's a lot of very technical design work that you do need to study as is, but like for content strategy, for UX writing, what are the benefits of actually like studying this and making this a more rigorous, like defined field versus like being expansive and porous and like bringing in like a lot of different disciplines and practices. And I mean, I think that as our field is growing, I think we are trying to define this nebulousness more and more. But I would hope, and I think that, there is this like balance to it as well, of recognizing, some of the intangibility of our work. And it's difficult in a world when we're always like chasing metrics and, being data driven. And that stuff is all super important and helps prove the case for a lot of why what we do is important. But as long as it continues to support the case for why it's important as opposed to shaping the direction of it, I think that's the balance that at least I know I strive for, and that the people I work with who do good work are striving for, figuring out what that right role is of using data and metrics to champion this kind of work versus directing this kind of work.
And I think, I mean, I guess my hope, and I feel like there's enough agitation out there from content strategists like us to be more, in, have more inclusion in the broader design team or marketing team, that the power of strategy becomes more important, and it's not the output but the outcomes that matter, and we start measuring those outcomes, because that's where things are going. And so I guess that's my hope, but I see trends toward that, and I've been seeing that over the last couple of years, where content is, more people are realizing how important content is, and including someone who's responsible for it at the start. And it doesn't have to be someone with the title content strategist or writer or whatever. It can be anyone, as long as someone is responsible for it.
So then how can writers and strategists kind of prepare for these shifts? Like how can they kind of position themselves for what's going to happen? Or even how can they start to lead the shift, so to speak?
Speak up, take your place at the table. You can't be shy. And I know this is something, it's taken me a long time to wait for somebody, I waited a long time for someone to ask me to do things, until I realized no one's ever going to ask me to do content strategy. I just have to do it. So you have to, I think, and I was thinking about this a little bit from, before we got on the call, is I think there's a little bit of rebel in all of us, that we see the need for change, and we see the need for something different, and you can't be afraid to stick your foot in new waters, but you have to back that up with knowledge and skills, to make that, and be able, when you volunteer for something, you also have to do it.
Absolutely. Well, I would like to kind of wrap this up. Are there any final thoughts that you guys would like to give to our audience members today? Any closing remarks?
Just to tack on to Carrie's point, that's something I've definitely been realizing. And I think a lot of people feel like it's the role of a product manager to lead, or even a designer to lead, but you can lead as a content strategist too. And that's something I'm learning for myself, and that I'm glad other people are seeing.
Yeah, agree with that for sure. And I think that I think there's greater receptiveness towards leading from content than we think there's going to be. It's rare that I've encountered a situation where I or another writer have spoken up and made a suggestion about words or message, and it was shot down because for whatever reason. I think that we bring something unique to the table that is different and still rather new for a lot of the partners that we work with. And I think that they're receptive to hearing outside perspectives. And if they're not receptive, then that's a different amount of work you have to take on. I think that you may be pleasantly surprised at what you find, or you may be pleasantly challenged. But I see a lot of opportunity for people like us.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you're coming from a place of authority, I feel like by and large people appreciate your input. Yeah, so bring it to the table.
This is great. Thank you, Alyssa, Carrie, Kimberly, and Bria for joining us. This was a great discussion. Again, to everyone who is listening, the recording will be available at the conclusion of this. So look forward to receiving a communication from UXTA regarding this recording. So thank you, everybody, for this panel. Please join us in March for our upcoming panel, and don't forget to go to our website and register for the international conference. So thank you, guys, and have a good rest of your Friday. All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.